Code Blue, room 314. Code Blue. The alarm screamed through Mercy General Hospital as Maya Johnson, the night security guard, rushed down the sterile hallway. What she found in that room would change her life forever. A man in cardiac arrest who looked nothing like the arrogant billionaire who had fired her mother 15 years ago. Maya's heavy boots pounded against the polished hospital floors as she sprinted toward the emergency. At 28, she had worked the graveyard shift at Mercy General for 6 years, but tonight felt different. The panic in the nurses' voices, the way Dr. Rodriguez was shouting orders, this wasn't just another medical emergency. She burst through the door of room 314, the hospital's most expensive private suite, and immediately understood why everyone was losing their minds. The patient lying unconscious on the bed was clearly someone important. His silk pajamas probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months, and the desperate urgency of the medical staff told her this was a VIP who couldn't be allowed to die on their watch. "Where's the cardiac team?" Dr. Rodriguez demanded, sweat beading on his forehead as he checked the heart monitor. The flatline beeping filled the room like a death sentence. "Still in surgery with the car accident victims," Nurse Patterson replied, her voice tight with fear. "ETA 15 minutes. "He doesn't have 15 minutes, Dr. Rodriguez said grimly. "This man is going to die if we don't act now." Maya stepped forward without hesitation. "I'm certified in advanced CPR. I was a paramedic for 4 years before I took this job." Dr. Rodriguez looked at her with desperate gratitude. "Thank God. Start compressions while I prep the crash cart." Maya moved to the bedside and positioned her hands on the stranger's chest. He appeared to be in his early 60s, with silver hair and expensive dental work visible even in his unconscious state. But there was something about his face that nagged at her memory, something familiar that she couldn't quite place. She began the rhythmic compressions, feeling his ribs flex under the pressure. Each push sent blood through his body, buying precious time while his heart refused to beat on its own. Maya had done this hundreds of times as a paramedic, but it never got easier. Holding someone's life in your hands was both terrifying and sacred. "Come on," she whispered under her breath. "Don't you dare give up on me." As she worked, Maya caught glimpses of details that painted a picture of extreme wealth. A platinum Rolex on his wrist worth more than her annual salary. Monogrammed cufflinks bearing the initials JW. A distinctive scar on his left hand that looked like it came from an expensive childhood accident. The kind that happens at private tennis clubs, not public playgrounds. "Clear!" Dr. Rodriguez shouted. Maya stepped back as electricity coursed through the man's body. His back arched off the bed, but the monitor remained flat. Again! Another shock. Still nothing. Maya resumed compressions, her arms burning from the effort. She had been doing this for 8 minutes straight, and exhaustion was setting in. But she refused to give up. In her 6 years of hospital security, she had seen too many families destroyed by loss. She wouldn't let this man's family go through that if she could prevent it. "Wait," she said suddenly, noticing something. "His skin color is improving. I think we're getting circulation." Dr. Rodriguez checked the monitor more carefully. "You're right. Keep going, but lighter pressure. I think his heart might be trying to restart." Maya adjusted her technique, and suddenly the monitor beeped. Once, then again. A weak, irregular rhythm, but definitely a heartbeat. The man's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. When his gaze met Maya's, she felt a jolt of recognition that made her stomach drop. Those eyes. She knew those eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible but unmistakably familiar. Maya's hands froze on his chest. She stared into his face, and suddenly the years melted away. She was 17 again, standing in the hallway outside her mother's office at Westfield Industries, listening to her world collapse. James Westfield, the billionaire CEO who had destroyed her family's life with casual cruelty. The memories hit her like a physical blow. 15 years ago, her mother, Carmen, had worked as head custodial supervisor at Westfield Industries. She had discovered that James Westfield was stealing from the employee pension fund, embezzling millions of dollars that belonged to the janitors, security guards, and maintenance workers who kept his empire running. When Carmen brought the evidence to Westfield, expecting him to be grateful for her honesty, he had laughed in her face. "You really think anyone will believe a cleaning lady over me?" he had said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're fired, and if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll make sure you never work again. Who's going to hire someone I blacklist, especially someone like you?" He had kept his promise with ruthless efficiency. Carmen was not only fired but systematically blacklisted from every decent job in the city. The family lost their apartment when Carmen couldn't find work. Maya's father, Miguel, took a second job driving nights for a taxi company, working 18-hour days just to keep food on the table. The stress destroyed their family. Miguel developed heart problems from exhaustion and died of a massive heart attack when Maya was 19. Carmen, broken by guilt and depression, followed him 3 years later. Maya was left alone, struggling to piece together a life from the wreckage James Westfield had created with his casual cruelty. And now, here he was, lying helpless in a hospital bed, his life literally in her hands. "You saved my life," James said, his voice growing stronger as the oxygen reached his brain. "I don't know how to thank you." Maya stared at him, her mind reeling. He didn't recognize her. Why would he? She'd been just a teenager in the background when he destroyed her family. To him, she was invisible then, and she was invisible now. "Just doing my job, sir," Maya managed to say, her voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions tearing through her chest. Dr. Rodriguez was checking James's vital signs, clearly relieved that his VIP patient was stable. "Mr. Westfield, you've had a serious heart attack. Miss Johnson here saved your life with some outstanding CPR." "Johnson?" James's eyes narrowed slightly, and Maya felt her pulse spike. "That name sounds familiar." "It's a common name," Maya said quickly, but she could see the wheels turning in his head. Over the next hour, as James was moved to the cardiac ICU and hooked up to monitoring equipment, Maya learned disturbing details about the man whose life she had saved. The nursing staff whispered about his reputation, a ruthless businessman who destroyed competitors, fired employees for sport, and treated workers like disposable tools. But she also learned something that changed everything. James Westfield was dying. Dr. Rodriguez confided to the head nurse that James had advanced coronary artery disease complicated by diabetes and kidney dysfunction. Even with the best medical care money could buy, he had weeks to live, maybe a couple of months if he was lucky. "He'll need constant monitoring," Dr. Rodriguez explained, "and given his high profile, we'll need extra security. I want someone watching his room around the clock." Maya realized with sick irony that she would likely be assigned to protect the man who had killed her parents as surely as if he had shot them. For the next 3 days, Maya stood guard outside James's room. She watched a parade of visitors, lawyers discussing his will, business partners maneuvering for position after his death, and family members who seemed more interested in their inheritance than his health. But James kept asking for her. "Miss Johnson," he would call whenever she passed his door. "Could you stay for a moment? I feel better when you're here." On the 4th night, when the hospital was quiet and most visitors had gone home, James asked Maya to sit with him. "I can't sleep," he admitted, looking smaller and more fragile than the powerful businessman who had once ruled a corporate empire. "Every time I close my eyes, I see myself dying. You brought me back from that darkness. I need to understand something. Why did you save me?" Maya looked at this dying man who had haunted her nightmares for 15 years. "Because it was the right thing to do." "But you don't even know me. I know more than you think." James studied her face in the dim hospital lighting. "There's something about you, Miss Johnson. Something familiar. Your voice, your face. Have we met before?" Maya's heart pounded. This was her moment. She could tell him exactly who she was, watch the recognition dawn in his eyes, make him face what he had done to her family. She could tell him that the daughter of the woman he destroyed was the only thing standing between him and death. Instead, she shook her head. "I don't think so, Mr. Westfield." That night, Maya went home to her small apartment and pulled out a box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were newspaper clippings about Westfield Industries, documents her mother had kept as evidence of the pension fund theft, and a letter Carmen had written to James's board of directors, but never sent. The letter detailed everything: the missing money, the cover-up, the retaliation against whistleblowers. It was her mother's final attempt to find justice before she gave up fighting. Maya stared at the letter for hours, thinking about justice, revenge, and the difference between them. The next morning, she returned to find James in worse condition. His kidneys were failing, and his heart was struggling despite the medications. Dr. Rodriguez was preparing his family for the inevitable. "Miss Johnson," James called weakly when he saw her, "please, I need to tell you something important." Maya approached his bedside, noting how gray his skin had become, how labored his breathing was. "I've done terrible things," James whispered. "I've destroyed people's lives for money and power. I'm dying, and all I can think about are the people I've wronged." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you saved my life when I didn't deserve it. There was a woman, 15 years ago, Carmen Johnson. I destroyed her for threatening my business. She was honest, decent, and I crushed her like she was nothing." Maya's breath caught in her throat. "What happened to her?" "She died, broken and forgotten. Her husband died from stress, and they had a daughter who lost everything because of my greed and pride." Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. "I've carried that guilt for years. If I could take it back, if I could tell that family how sorry I am." Maya stood frozen, staring at this broken man confessing to the crime that had shaped her entire adult life. Here was the acknowledgement her mother had died waiting for: admission, remorse, truth. "Mr. Westfield," Maya said slowly, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "what if I told you that Carmen Johnson's daughter was standing right here?" James's eyes widened in shock and terror. "What are you saying?" "My name is Maya Johnson. Carmen was my mother. Miguel Johnson was my father, and he worked himself to death because of what you did to our family." The heart monitor began beeping frantically as James struggled to process this revelation. "My God, Maya, you were just a child. I remember you now. You were there the day I fired your mother. I was 17, old enough to understand that you destroyed my family for sport." James tried to sit up, his face pale with more than just illness. "You saved my life. After what I did to you, you actually saved my life. Why?" Maya looked at this dying man who had been the villain of her story for 15 years and felt something she hadn't expected: pity. "Because I'm not you, Mr. Westfield. I don't destroy people for revenge. What can I do? How can I possibly make this right?" Maya pulled out her mother's unsent letter and placed it on his bedside table. "My mother wrote this before she died. She never sent it because she thought no one would believe her. Read it." With trembling hands, James opened the letter and read Carmen's words, her pain, her truth, her final plea for justice. When he finished, he was sobbing like a child. "I'll make this right," he promised. "I'll tell everyone what I did. I'll expose everything. It's too late for my mother, but it's not too late for the others you've hurt." James nodded weakly. "Will you help me? Will you help me find them and make amends?" Over the following weeks, as James fought his declining health, Maya watched him use his remaining time and resources to right the wrongs of his past. He contacted every person he had wronged, made financial restitution where possible, and used his influence to expose the corruption he had participated in for decades. Most importantly, he established the Carmen Johnson Foundation for Workers' Rights, with an initial endowment of $500 million to protect employees from retaliation and ensure fair treatment in the workplace. James also did something Maya never expected. He made her the foundation's executive director, with full authority to use his fortune to help working families. "I can't bring your parents back," James told Maya during one of their final conversations, "but I can make sure their suffering leads to something meaningful." Maya watched this transformation with complex emotions. Part of her wanted to hate him, to let him die in guilt and misery. But she also saw genuine remorse, a desperate desire to use his final weeks to heal the wounds he had created. The lawyers came next, with documents that would change Maya's life forever. James had rewritten his will, leaving the bulk of his estate to the foundation. But he had also left Maya a personal inheritance: his penthouse apartment, his art collection, and $50 million. "I know it can't replace what you lost," he said when Maya protested, "but maybe it can give you the resources to prevent other families from going through what yours did." When James Westfield died 6 weeks later, his funeral was a strange affair. Business leaders who had feared and respected him sat alongside workers he had wronged and then tried to help in his final days. Maya delivered the eulogy, standing at the podium of the same church where her parents had been memorialized years earlier. James Westfield was not a good man for most of his life, Maya told the crowded church. He caused immeasurable pain and destroyed families for profit. But in his final weeks, he proved that redemption is possible for anyone willing to face their crimes and work to make amends. Maya returned to her security job at the hospital, but not for long. The Carmen Johnson Foundation needed her full attention, and the work was both challenging and rewarding. They helped expose wage theft at dozens of companies, protected whistleblowers from retaliation, and provided legal support for workers fighting unfair treatment. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came 6 months after James's death, when Maya received a letter from a young woman named Sophia Martinez. "Miss Johnson," the letter read, "my mother was a janitor at Westfield Industries 15 years ago. She found evidence of safety violations that could have killed people, but she was afraid to report them because she'd heard what happened to Carmen Johnson. When she finally found the courage to speak up, she was fired and blacklisted, just like your mother. My family lost everything, and my mother died believing she was a coward for not speaking up sooner. I wanted you to know that the Carmen Johnson Foundation helped my family get justice. The safety violations were exposed, the company paid damages, and most importantly, my mother's name was cleared. She died a hero, not a coward. Thank you for making sure her story had a different ending than your mother's." Maya read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This was what justice looked like, not revenge, but prevention, not punishment, but protection. On the first anniversary of James's death, Maya stood in the cemetery where her parents were buried. Their simple headstones now sat beside a large memorial that James had commissioned, a granite monument honoring all the workers whose courage in the face of injustice plants seeds of hope for future generations. Maya looked at the memorial and thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. A moment of choice in a hospital room had changed everything, not just for her, but for countless workers who would benefit from the Foundation's protection. She had learned that revenge might feel satisfying, but justice builds something that lasts. Her mother's name was no longer whispered in shame, but spoken with respect in boardrooms and courtrooms across the country. A year later, Maya testified before Congress about the need for stronger whistleblower protections. As she spoke about her mother's courage and the price of speaking truth to power, she noticed something remarkable in the gallery. Sitting together were dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work. Former Westfield Industries employees who had received justice, families who had been made whole, workers who had found the courage to report wrongdoing because they knew the Carmen Johnson Foundation would protect them. Each of them represented her mother's legacy, the ripple effects of one woman's courage to do what was right, even when it cost her everything. After her testimony, Maya was approached by a young journalist who asked, "What would you say to people who think your mother died for nothing, that her sacrifice was meaningless because she never saw justice in her lifetime?" Maya thought for a moment, remembering her mother's pain, her father's despair, and the long journey that had brought her to this moment. "My mother didn't die for nothing," she said firmly. "She died fighting for what was right. Sometimes the seeds of justice take years to grow, but they always grow. Every person we've helped, every corrupt practice we've exposed, every family we've protected, that's my mother's legacy. She planted the seed of truth, and it grew into something that will protect workers forever." That evening, Maya visited her parents' graves, as she did every month. This time, she brought news that would have made them proud. The Carmen Johnson Foundation had just helped pass the strongest whistleblower protection law in American history. Companies could no longer retaliate against employees who reported wrongdoing, and families like hers would never again face destruction for doing what was right. As Maya stood in the quiet cemetery, She reflected on the choices that had led her here. She could have let James Westfield die in that hospital room. She could have chosen revenge over redemption, hatred over healing. Instead, she had saved the life of her family's tormentor, then helped him use his remaining time to transform from destroyer to protector. James Westfield had tried to erase Carmen Johnson from history. Instead, he had ensured that her story would protect workers for generations to come. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Rodriguez. Maya, I wanted you to know. The hospital just implemented new protocols protecting staff who report safety violations. They're calling them the Carmen Johnson Protocols. Your mom would be so proud. Maya smiled, looking up at the stars. Her mother's fight for justice had begun with a single act of courage in an office 15 years ago. Tonight, it had become policy at hospitals across the nation. Sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones that take a lifetime to achieve. And sometimes the greatest act of justice isn't destroying your enemy, but helping them become the person they should have been all along. The security guard's daughter had learned that lesson well, and her mother's legacy would live on in every worker protected by the courage to speak truth to power. If this story of transformation, redemption, and the long arc of justice touched your heart, remember that every act of courage, no matter how small, can change the world. Sometimes it just takes longer than we expect to see the results. The greatest revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building something so powerful that their cruelty becomes the foundation for protecting others. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.